Some are born into power, others rise to earn it. Edward Roman III of England became king at just 14, inheriting a throne shadowed by corruption, betrayal, and doubt. The odds were stacked against him, yet he transformed his kingdom into one of the most powerful empires in Europe. This is not only the story of battles and kings, but of courage, vision, endurance, and honor. Let us explore the journey of a boy king who became a legendary leader. He was only 14 when the weight of a kingdom fell upon his shoulders. The crown, too heavy for his young head, carried the burden of betrayal, broken alliances, and a nation in unrest. Edward was born into a time when England was wounded by corruption and deceit. His father, King Edward Roman II, had lost the respect of his people and the trust of his lords. The kingdom that should have been a place of order and glory had turned into a web of fear and disloyalty. When the people finally rose against the throne, it was not the boy they blamed, it was the weakness of those before him, and yet it was the boy who would have to rebuild everything from ashes. In the grand halls of Westminster, young Edward stood in silence as his mother and her allies forced his father to step aside. The boy understood little of the politics that swirled around him, but he understood pain. He saw the sorrow of a father stripped of his power, the anger of nobles hungry for control, and the unease of a nation divided. That day he learned his first lesson as a ruler, that a crown is not a gift, it is a trial, and those who wear it must learn to carry both the glory and the grief it brings. The early days of his reign were ruled not by him, but by those who claimed to protect him. His mother, Queen Isabella, and her ally, Roger Mortimer, took the seat of power, controlling the kingdom in his name. The young king watched from the shadows, realizing that the same people who had spoken of justice were now drunk with authority. He felt like a prisoner inside his own court, surrounded by deceit disguised as loyalty. But rather than letting bitterness consume him, Edward watched, learned, and waited. He began to see how people moved when power blinded them, and how justice could be twisted when truth was silenced. Each passing year hardened him. He trained his body in the art of war and his mind in the craft of leadership. The boy who once listened quietly now studied the ancient kings, reading of their victories and their mistakes. He walked among soldiers, speaking with them, understanding their struggles. He knew that one day, when the moment came, he would not just inherit a kingdom, he would reclaim it. Every insult, every injustice, every deception was a spark added to the fire that burned inside him. By the age of 17, that fire could no longer be contained. Edward had become a young man of sharp vision and quiet determination. He saw through Mortimer's manipulation, through the arrogance that ruled in his name. The kingdom whispered that the boy king had no power, that he was too young to command, but they did not see the resolve in his eyes. They did not know that patience had become his greatest weapon. He had waited long enough, and his time to act had finally come. The night of reckoning arrived without warning. With the help of loyal allies, Edward struck swiftly, capturing Mortimer in his chambers. The man who once ruled England in his name was dragged before the young king, no longer untouchable. The people who had once bowed to Mortimer now turned their loyalty toward the rightful ruler. In that single act of courage, Edward transformed from a figurehead into a true monarch. It was not bloodlust that guided him, but justice, a justice he had witnessed denied for too long. When Mortimer faced his punishment, the kingdom saw something they had forgotten: strength guided by wisdom. Edward did not gloat, he did not boast, he simply restored balance. In that moment, England saw that their young king was not the shadow of his father, nor the puppet of his mother. He was his own man, forged in betrayal but guided by conscience. Was this moment that defined him the moment when the boy became the lion? With the traitors removed and his authority restored, Edward turned his eyes toward the kingdom that was now truly his. He saw its wounds, the broken trust of the people, the scattered pride of its soldiers, and the fading strength of its faith. But instead of despair, he saw opportunity. He knew that to rebuild England, he must unite it, inspire it, and lead it with both courage and justice. The throne was no longer a burden, it was his purpose. He surrounded himself with wise men, experienced warriors, and loyal hearts. He rebuilt his army not with arrogance but with discipline. He rekindled the spirit of unity, reminding his people that they were not just a nation, they were a legacy. And as he looked upon the rising sun over the English coast, he felt within him the first stirrings of destiny. He understood now that every pain of his youth had been preparing him for something greater. Thus began the story of King Edward Roman III, not as a prince handed power, but as a young man who earned it through patience, strategy, and faith. The child who once lived in the shadow of betrayal now stood in the light of purpose, ready to reclaim not only a kingdom, but the honor of a nation that had forgotten its roar. The betrayal that shaped King Edward Roman III's destiny came not from his enemies, but from the ones closest to him. When his father was dethroned, it was his own mother and her ally, Roger Mortimer, who had taken control of the kingdom under the claim of protecting him. At first, Edward believed their words. He thought they sought peace after years of turmoil, but soon he began to see through the illusion. His mother's heart had turned cold with ambition, and Mortimer's hunger for power grew like fire consuming dry wood. What began as guidance became imprisonment. The young king, though crowned in name, was treated as a child incapable of command. Every royal decree bore his seal, but none of the words were his own. Edward watched in silence as Mortimer governed England with arrogance. The lords feared him, the people despised him, and the true king remained voiceless. He saw the wealth of the nation spent to secure Mortimer's luxuries, while soldiers went unpaid and borders weakened. England, once a proud realm, was fading under greed and fear. But while others submitted to despair, Edward did what few could. He learned from betrayal. He studied the hearts of men, the way power could corrupt even the righteous, and the way justice must sometimes sleep before it awakens with purpose. Mortimer's betrayal was not only political, it was personal. The man who had claimed to guide him now mocked his youth and called him unready to rule. His own mother, once his protector, now saw him as a threat to her new throne of influence. The palace that should have been his home became a cage of deceit. Guards loyal to Mortimer watched his every move. His words were weighed, his letters read, his freedom reduced to a shadow. But through the bars of control, Edward's spirit refused to be chained. He learned to hide his thoughts behind calm eyes, to speak less and observe more. He understood that patience could become the strongest weapon when used wisely. He began to find allies in secret, men of honor who had served his father and remained loyal to the true crown, whispered their oaths in the dark corridors of Westminster. Edward listened to their grievances, shared their frustration, and inspired them with his quiet resolve. They saw in him not just a boy born to rule, but a man destined to lead. His courage was silent, but it carried weight. It was not the roar of rebellion that began his rise. It was the whisper of determination. As the years passed, Mortimer grew careless. Power had blinded him. He underestimated the strength of the one he thought he controlled. He flaunted his influence before the nobles, wore garments embroidered with gold, and even spoke as if he were king. But every act of arrogance brought him closer to his downfall. Edward noted every weakness, every crack in Mortimer's foundation, and waited for the right moment. He knew that a strike born of wisdom lasts longer than one born of rage. The betrayal had another cost. It strained Edward's relationship with his mother. He still held love for her, but it was a wounded love. He could not understand how she had allowed greed to guide her heart. He prayed for clarity, for strength, for a way to correct the wrongs without drowning in bitterness. The lessons of betrayal were heavy, but they carved his spirit into something greater, a leader who could feel deeply yet act justly. He realized that true justice does not come from revenge, it comes from restoring order with fairness, the realm continued to whisper. Some pitied the young king, others doubted he would ever take control. But Edward did not seek to prove them wrong with words. He was waiting for the one perfect night when he could act with precision and righteousness. He gathered information quietly, the loyalties of his guards, movements of Mortimer, the mood of the nobles. He was patient because he understood that rushing justice could destroy it. When the time finally came, it was not anger that guided him but divine calm. On a cold autumn night in Nottingham Castle, Edward and his trusted men made their move. They entered through a secret passage, the air thick with purpose. The guards were overpowered without chaos, and Mortimer was caught in his chambers, stunned to see the boy he once controlled standing before him as a man. In that moment, the true power shifted not because of swords, but because of courage. The nobles awakened to a new dawn. Mortimer was no longer the master of England. He was the prisoner of justice. The betrayal that once humiliated Edward had become the fire that forged him. He looked upon the man who had ruled through deceit and saw not victory but clarity. He had learned the hardest truth, that betrayal can destroy the weak, but it refines the strong. From that day, Edward carried the memory of this betrayal not as bitterness, but as wisdom. He understood that those who rise to lead must first know the pain of being betrayed, for only through that pain can a man learn to rule with patience, fairness, and strength born not of vengeance, but of purpose. When Edward Roman III finally claimed full authority over England, he inherited a kingdom riddled with corruption, fear, and betrayal. Years under the influence of Roger Mortimer and Queen Isabella had left the court divided, nobles selfish, and ordinary citizens distrustful of the throne. Edward understood that before he could expand his power beyond England, he had to restore the very foundations of his kingdom: honor, justice, and moral authority. Edward recognized that leadership is not simply about wearing a crown, it is about setting an example. He began by addressing the corruption that had seeped into every level of government. Officials who had abused their positions were removed or disciplined, and those who had served with loyalty and integrity were promoted. Edward wanted his people to know that honesty and dedication would always be rewarded. Justice, for Edward, was both a moral and practical priority. He personally oversaw trials to ensure fairness, refusing to let personal interests or political convenience influence decisions. By demonstrating that no one, not even a noble or advisor, was above the law, Edward reinforced the principle that England's strength would come from order, fairness, and trust in leadership. The king also worked tirelessly to rebuild the relationship between the monarchy and the nobility. Many nobles had grown self-serving during years of weak leadership. Edward used diplomacy, rewards for loyalty, and clear enforcement of rules to encourage cooperation. By aligning their interests with the kingdom's welfare, he created a sense of unity and shared purpose that became critical for both governance and war. Edward's reforms extended beyond the nobility to the common people. He ensured that laws were applied consistently, taxes were fair, and grievances were heard. This approach earned him respect and loyalty across England, reinforcing the idea that a just ruler protects all subjects, not just those with power or wealth. By restoring faith in the crown, Edward strengthened the moral and social fabric of the nation. Restoring honor was also a personal endeavor. Edward conducted himself with courage, integrity, and visible fairness. He led by example, demonstrating that true kingship is measured not by wealth or territory, but by the principles one upholds. His personal conduct inspired his generals, advisors, and citizens to emulate the values he embodied. Leadership, Edward proved, is as much about character as it is about authority. The king also addressed the military structure to ensure justice and fairness within the army. Promotions were based on merit and loyalty, not favoritism. Soldiers knew that their efforts and discipline would be recognized, which increased morale and cohesion. Edward understood that an army that respects leadership is far more effective than one driven by fear or self-interest. Edward's actions also sent a message beyond England. Other kingdoms began to respect a ruler who acted with fairness, courage, and integrity. Diplomats, allies, and even adversaries recognized that Edward's authority was rooted in justice, not merely in power or intimidation. England's reputation grew because of its king's moral strength as much as its military strength. Rebuilding honor and justice was not easy. Many resisted his reforms, fearing loss of privilege or influence. Yet Edward remained steadfast, demonstrating that a leader's duty to principle is greater than the pressures of opposition. His determination earned loyalty from those who valued integrity and sent a clear warning to those who sought to undermine the crown. Edward Roman III's restoration of honor and justice established the foundation for his future successes. A kingdom guided by fairness, integrity, and moral leadership is stronger, more loyal, and more resilient. His story teaches that before a leader can achieve greatness on a battlefield or in the world, he must first cultivate justice and honor at home, creating a legacy that endures beyond his reign. Edward Roman III understood that restoring justice at home was only the first step. A kingdom's true greatness lies in its strength, unity, and influence abroad. From early in his reign, he dreamed of a strong and respected England, a nation that could command loyalty, admiration, and fear across Europe. His vision was not born of greed, but of purpose, to build a kingdom that could endure and prosper for generations. He believed that every empire is first built in the mind. Edward spent hours studying history, military campaigns, and the strategies of past rulers. He learned from their victories and mistakes, realizing that planning and foresight are the cornerstones of lasting success. An empire without vision, he understood, is like a ship without a rudder. It drifts aimlessly and is vulnerable to every storm. Edward's dream of a strong empire was also a moral vision. He believed that England could only rise through justice, integrity, and loyalty. Military strength alone could conquer lands, but only honor and unity could maintain them. This principle guided both his domestic reforms and his foreign ambitions, ensuring that the foundation of his empire would be principled leadership. He began aligning his nobles and generals with this vision. Every knight, advisor, and official was reminded that England's future depended on discipline, cooperation, and loyalty. By instilling a shared sense of purpose, Edward transformed a fractured kingdom into a society that could act collectively to achieve greatness, proving that a dream can only be realized through unity of effort. Edward also emphasized preparation and strategy as key components of empire building. He invested in military training, fortifications, and the development of tactics that could overcome larger and more powerful enemies. Each soldier, archer, and knight became part of a larger vision, trained not just for the moment but for the long-term success of England. The king's ambition extended beyond military power. Edward sought economic stability, diplomatic alliances, and cultural influence to make England respected on the European stage. A strong empire, he knew, must excel in multiple arenas: commerce, governance, and diplomacy, in addition to war. His vision was comprehensive, combining practical measures with strategic foresight. Edward inspired his people to believe in the dream. He led by example, demonstrating courage, fairness, and wisdom. Citizens saw that their king was not driven by selfish ambition, but by a desire to elevate England as a whole. His ability to unite hearts and minds under a common purpose became one of the most powerful tools in transforming his kingdom into an enduring empire. His vision also included preparing future generations. Edward's eldest son, Edward the Black Prince, was trained in leadership, strategy, and honor. the king understood that an empire does not rise and endure under one leader alone. It must cultivate a legacy of capable and principled successors who can continue the mission. Despite challenges and skeptics, Edward never wavered in his dream. Some nobles doubted his ambitions, believing that England was too small to compete with France or other European powers. Yet he remained steadfast, showing that vision and perseverance often succeed where doubt and fear falter. His determination inspired loyalty and courage, both at home and abroad. Ultimately, Edward Roman III's dream of a strong empire became the guiding principle for his reign. It shaped his military campaigns, diplomatic decisions, and domestic reforms. His story teaches that leadership begins with a clear vision, and that true greatness arises when preparation, integrity, and courage are combined with a steadfast commitment to one's dream. A strong empire is imagined first, then built with unwavering determination and strategic foresight. By 1337, Edward Roman III's vision of a strong and respected England extended beyond its borders. He believed that England had a legitimate claim to the French throne, and he knew that asserting this claim would be both a test of leadership and a step toward establishing England as a dominant European power. This conviction set the stage for the beginning of the 100 Years' War, a conflict that would define his reign. Edward did not approach this decision lightly. Declaring war is the gravest act a king can undertake, and he fully understood the risks involved. Yet he recognized that leadership requires courage, particularly when defending honor and pursuing justice. In his mind, England's future depended on bold action, and the young king was ready to lead decisively. Preparation was key. Edward meticulously reorganized his army, trained his soldiers, and ensured that his generals were loyal and competent. Every decision, from troop deployments to supply lines, reflected careful planning. Edward believed that no victory could be achieved through strength alone. It required intelligence, strategy, and disciplined execution. Edward also leveraged diplomacy to strengthen his position. He secured alliances and negotiated support from sympathetic nobles and neighboring territories. These alliances would provide both resources and strategic advantage, proving that warfare is not only about fighting but also about building networks of support. Every diplomatic move reinforced the larger vision of a strong empire. The war was not only a contest for territory, but also a matter of reputation and honor. Edward understood that England's position among European kingdoms depended on demonstrating strength and legitimacy. By asserting his claim to the French throne, he was sending a clear message. England was a nation that would defend its rights and maintain its honor no matter the opposition. Edward led his army with personal courage, often appearing on the front lines alongside his men. This presence inspired confidence and loyalty among his troops, reinforcing the idea that leadership is not a distant concept but a living example. Soldiers who saw their king share risks were motivated to fight with greater discipline and determination. Despite the challenges, Edward remained focused and adaptable. Battles were long, supply lines precarious, and the French forces formidable. Yet he understood that endurance, combined with strategic thinking, often outweighs raw numbers or temporary setbacks. Each campaign advanced his broader vision, even when immediate victories were not guaranteed. The 100 Years' War also served as a training ground for the next generation. Edward's eldest son, the Black Prince, learned leadership, strategy, and courage firsthand. The campaign became more than a war for land. It became an opportunity to instill values and skills that would shape the future of England's leadership and military prowess. Edward's campaign strengthened England's position in Europe, not only militarily but also politically. Other kingdoms began to respect a king who combined courage, strategy, and moral authority. Edward demonstrated that success is achieved not only through strength but through careful planning, disciplined execution, and the ability to inspire loyalty in both soldiers and allies. Ultimately, the beginning of the 100 Years' War illustrates a timeless lesson. True leaders act boldly when duty and destiny call. Edward Roman III showed that preparation, strategy, and courage are the keys to overcoming challenges, asserting honor and advancing a vision. His actions during this period laid the foundation for England's emergence as a powerful and respected empire. In 1346, Edward Roman III faced one of the most critical battles of his reign, the Battle of Crécy. The French army, vast and confident, underestimated the smaller English force. Yet Edward's leadership, preparation, and strategy turned the odds in his favor. This victory would not only cement his reputation as a brilliant military commander, but also demonstrate the power of intelligence and discipline over sheer numbers. Edward carefully studied the battlefield before the engagement. He positioned his forces on high ground, using terrain to his advantage. Archers were placed strategically to maximize their long-range effectiveness, while infantry and cavalry were deployed to reinforce weak points. Edward understood that careful positioning could compensate for being outnumbered, and that foresight is often the difference between victory and defeat. The English longbow played a decisive role in the battle. Edward had trained his archers rigorously, ensuring precision, speed, and coordination. When the French cavalry charged, they were met with volleys of arrows that disrupted their formation, causing chaos and confusion. Edward's innovation in utilizing the longbow illustrates his understanding that technological and tactical advantages can outweigh numerical superiority. Edward did not command from a distance. He rode among his troops, wearing his armor and sharing the dangers of battle. His courage inspired his soldiers and reinforced their loyalty. They knew that their king was not just a figurehead, but a leader willing to endure the same risks they faced. Leadership, Edward demonstrated, earns respect and unity through shared experience and bravery. The French army, confident in its numbers, launched repeated attacks. Yet Edward's disciplined formations held firm. His careful preparation, combined with the archer's skill and the steadfastness of his infantry, created a defensive advantage that neutralized the enemy's superiority. This battle became a testament to the principle that planning, coordination, and discipline can overcome overwhelming odds. Edward also displayed adaptability during the engagement. He adjusted his tactics in response to the unfolding situation, reinforcing threatened positions and exploiting weaknesses in the French lines. This flexibility ensured that his forces remained effective throughout the prolonged battle. He demonstrated that strategy required both preparation and the ability to respond intelligently to change. The Black Prince, Edward's eldest son, fought alongside his father at Crécy. Observing Edward's courage, decision-making, and discipline provided invaluable lessons for the next generation of leadership. The battle was more than a victory for England. It was a training ground that instilled principles of honor, strategy, and courage in those who would continue Edward's legacy. The victory at Crécy elevated England's reputation across Europe. A smaller, well-prepared force defeating a much larger army became a symbol of innovation, courage, and leadership. Edward's triumph proved that effective planning, disciplined execution, and moral authority can surpass numerical advantage. England emerged stronger, respected and feared by neighboring kingdoms. Edward's leadership extended beyond the battlefield. After the battle, he treated captured nobles and knights with respect, reinforcing the principles of honor and chivalry. This approach ensured loyalty among allies and admiration even from adversaries, demonstrating that victory rooted in integrity strengthens both reputation and influence. Ultimately, the Battle of Crécy teaches a timeless lesson. Courage, preparation, and strategic thinking can transform daunting challenges into historic triumphs. Edward Roman III's leadership at Crécy exemplifies the principle that wisdom, discipline, and moral authority are far more powerful than numbers alone. His victory laid the groundwork for England's rise as a dominant power in Europe, and cemented his place in history as a king who led with both mind and heart. Edward Roman III's reign demonstrated a timeless principle. Victory is not determined by the size of an army, but by the strategy, preparation, and intelligence behind it. Throughout his campaigns, he consistently faced opponents with far greater numbers. Yet he repeatedly proved that careful planning and tactical brilliance could overcome overwhelming odds, and that wisdom often outweighs brute force. From the very beginning, Edward understood that raw numbers could not guarantee success. He trained his soldiers meticulously, emphasizing coordination between infantry, archers, and cavalry. Each unit had a clear role, and every soldier understood the larger plan. Discipline and structure, he knew, could multiply the effectiveness of even a smaller force. Edward carefully studied his enemies before battle. He analyzed their strengths, weaknesses, habits, and formations by understanding the opponent. He could anticipate their moves and exploit vulnerabilities. Strategy, Edward showed, begins long before the battlefield is reached, in observation, research, and insight. One of Edward's most innovative strategic decisions was the use of the English longbow. This weapon, wielded by skilled archers, allowed his forces to strike from a distance, disrupt enemy formations, and reduce the effectiveness of cavalry charges. By turning technology and skill into tactical advantage, Edward demonstrated that intelligent use of resources can offset numerical inferiority. Edward's positioning of his troops was another key element. At Crécy and other battles, he carefully selected terrain that gave his army defensive advantages. Hills, narrow passes, and strategic choke points became force multipliers, allowing smaller units to resist and overcome larger forces. He showed that the smart use of terrain is as critical as strength. Flexibility was central to Edward's strategy. He adapted his tactics mid-battle based on changing circumstances, reinforcing weak points and exploiting enemy mistakes. A rigid plan could fail, but his ability to respond intelligently ensured that his forces remained effective throughout the engagement. True strategy, Edward proved, is both planning and adaptability. Edward's leadership also reinforced his strategy. By leading from the front, he inspired confidence and discipline in his troops. Soldiers trusted that the plan was sound and that their king shared the dangers they faced. This unity of purpose ensured that the strategy was executed effectively, turning planning into action. Even when facing superior numbers, Edward's campaigns were marked by efficiency and minimal unnecessary risk. He avoided reckless engagements and struck decisively when conditions favored his forces. This patience and calculated boldness reflect the wisdom that strategy is not about constant action, but about choosing the right moment to act. Edward extended the principle of strategy beyond the battlefield. In diplomacy, governance, and alliance building, he carefully planned moves to strengthen England's position in Europe. Strategic thinking was a guiding principle of his reign, demonstrating that leadership requires foresight and vision in all arenas, not just war. Ultimately, Edward Roman III's life teaches that strategy triumphs over numbers when guided by intelligence, discipline, and moral authority. His victories were not accidents. They were the result of preparation, innovation, adaptability, and courage. By leading wisely and planning strategically, Edward proved that even the smallest force can achieve extraordinary results, leaving a legacy of brilliance and inspiration. Edward Roman III understood that an empire's true power comes not only from its armies or wealth, but from the unity of its people. A divided kingdom is vulnerable, no matter how strong its leaders or its armies may be. From the start of his reign, Edward prioritized uniting nobles, soldiers, and citizens under a shared vision of justice, honor, and prosperity. He began with the nobility, who had long been divided by personal ambition and rivalries. Edward reminded them that their disputes weakened the kingdom and invited enemies to take advantage. Through careful diplomacy, rewards for loyalty, and firm but fair enforcement of rules, he encouraged cooperation and a sense of shared purpose among the ruling class. Edward also led by example, sharing hardships with his soldiers during campaigns. By being present on the front lines, he demonstrated courage, resilience, and solidarity. His troops knew that their king would face the same dangers and hardships as they did, which inspired confidence and loyalty. Unity, he showed, begins when leaders share the struggles of those they lead. He reinforced moral unity by consistently demonstrating integrity, fairness, and justice. Nobles, knights, and ordinary citizens observed that Edward's decisions were guided by principles rather than favoritism or personal gain. By modeling these values, he cultivated a culture of trust and mutual respect that strengthened bonds within the kingdom. The king also extended unity to ordinary citizens. He listened to their grievances, ensured laws were enforced fairly, and protected them from abuse. This approach fostered loyalty and trust, demonstrating that a united empire requires both leaders and citizens to share a commitment to justice and collective well-being. In military campaigns, unity proved decisive. Soldiers who trusted each other and their leaders fought cohesively, even when facing superior enemy forces. The discipline and coordination of Edward's army allowed smaller forces to overcome larger, less organized opponents. He understood that strength is magnified when people act together toward a common goal. Edward nurtured collaboration among his generals and advisors as well. He valued their input, encouraged discussion, and integrated diverse perspectives into decision-making. By empowering others and promoting teamwork, he demonstrated that leadership is not about control, but about creating a shared vision and enabling others to contribute fully. Even when conflicts arose among nobles or advisors, Edward acted as a mediator, emphasizing the kingdom's greater purpose over personal grievances. This ability to balance authority with diplomacy reinforced loyalty and demonstrated that unity is maintained not through fear, but through mutual respect and understanding. Edward also celebrated achievements and recognized contributions, both large and small. Soldiers were honored for bravery, nobles for loyalty, and citizens for service. By acknowledging each person's role, he reinforced the idea that everyone's efforts mattered in building a strong, united kingdom. Ultimately, Edward Roman III's focus on unity ensured that England could withstand internal and external challenges. His reign teaches a timeless lesson. Cohesion, trust, and shared purpose amplify strength far beyond what numbers or individual power can achieve. A kingdom united under honor and justice becomes an enduring force capable of achieving extraordinary success. Edward Roman III's reign was not only marked by victories and achievements, but also by the relentless challenges he faced. From political intrigue to grueling wars, his life demonstrated that true leadership requires endurance, the ability to persist with courage, discipline, and vision. Even when circumstances seemed overwhelming, he became king as a teenager in a kingdom weakened by corruption and internal strife. For years, he lived under the control of others, observing injustice while unable to act. This early period taught him that endurance is not passive. It is the strength to wait, prepare, and learn while circumstances are beyond your control. Patience, he realized, is a key component of lasting power. Wars tested Edward's endurance like nothing else. Campaigns, such as those in the 100 Years' War, demanded months of planning, harsh conditions, and constant danger. Soldiers suffered from hunger, fatigue, and disease, yet Edward remained steadfast, sharing their struggles and inspiring them to continue. Endurance, he showed, is contagious. A leader's resilience strengthens the resolve of those who follow. Political challenges were equally demanding. Nobles plotted, rival powers schemed, and internal disputes threatened stability. Edward understood that leadership requires the ability to face opposition calmly, make sound decisions under pressure, and persist with integrity, even when confronted with betrayal or manipulation. Edward also relied on faith as a source of endurance. He believed that his mission to lead justly and build a strong England was divinely guided. This spiritual foundation provided him with inner strength during moments of doubt and adversity, showing that true endurance is rooted not only in physical or mental stamina, but also in moral and spiritual conviction. Personal loss and tragedy were constant companions. Allies fell in battle, wars brought suffering, and challenges to his authority created stress and uncertainty. Yet Edward pressed on, understanding that endurance is about continuing to act with courage and purpose, even when grief or fear threatens to overwhelm you. Strength is forged through trials, not comfort. Edward also endured the passage of time. Ruling for over 50 years, he faced generational changes, shifting alliances, and evolving threats. Remaining consistent, fair, and visionary over decades requires extraordinary perseverance. His longevity as a ruler illustrates that endurance is a lifelong practice, demanding patience, discipline, and commitment to principle. Even in old age and ill health, Edward continued to focus on the welfare of his kingdom. He never allowed personal hardship to distract him from the responsibilities of leadership. By persevering in the face of physical, emotional, and political challenges, he modeled endurance for future generations of leaders. The results of Edward's endurance were profound. England became a stronger, more respected kingdom, its institutions more stable, and its people more loyal. He demonstrated that endurance is not passive suffering but active persistence, a combination of strategy, courage, discipline, and moral commitment that turns challenges into triumphs. Ultimately, Edward Roman III's life teaches a timeless lesson. Greatness is achieved and preserved through endurance. Power, victories, and reputation may be fleeting, but the ability to persist with integrity, courage, and vision ensures lasting success. His story reminds us that enduring hardship is not a weakness, but the defining trait of leaders who leave a legacy that withstands the test of time. Edward Roman III's life reminds us that greatness is not inherited. It is earned through courage, wisdom, and endurance. From a boy burdened with a throne to a king who inspired nations, his story shows that true leaders turn challenges into opportunities, vision into reality, and struggle into lasting legacy. His journey offers a blueprint for anyone who wishes to rise above adversity, lead with integrity, and leave a mark that endures through time.